Hello and welcome to the Remaining Sane, Finding Peace in Our Chaos podcast, a podcast about both theology and police work. I'm your host, Will, and in today's episode, I interview a philosopher turned apologist, Mark Coppenger. Morning, Mark. How are you?
Doing great, thanks.
Good. Well, Mark, before we get going, would you mind giving us just a brief background as to who you are, just your basic life background?
Yeah. Well, I guess I've been a PK and a TK. A TK is a teacher's kid. All my life, my dad taught at a Christian school. So he taught at Carson Newman in Belmont in Tennessee, and then one called Ouachita in Arkansas. Starts with an O, sounds like a W, but it's an O. So I was raised in that, but he was also a preacher, and he has been a full-time pastor, but he was doing supply preaching on weekends. But I heard my daddy preach, and then I majored in his major at college. He taught Bible and things like this. He had a doctorate in church history from Edinburgh, but he also was drafted to teach philosophy. And I majored in philosophy, and then went to Vanderbilt and got the PhD in philosophy and taught there. And then I taught at Wheaton College, way up. I became a Yankee. So I was up in the Chicago area for a number of years teaching at Wheaton. And then God called me to be a minister, and that was quite a interesting thing. I thought, man, I don't want to do that. That's just like being a pet squirrel or something. Philosophers are so, just so cool, and I enjoyed it, and I appreciated it. But I said, yep. And so we pulled up stakes, took our boys down to Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth, and I got the MDiv, and then I pastored in Arkansas for 5 years, and then I became a denominational servant for the Southern Baptist Convention. And down the way, and by the way, I was an ROTC product, so I was doing Army stuff on the side and did that for 28 years. But anyway, I ended up later on doing things that I'd been, encouraging people to do, is plant churches. So I became a church planter in Evanston, Illinois, on the North Shore of Chicago. Did that for 11 years, and then and by the way, along the way, I taught at seminaries too, Midwestern and Southern Seminary. And I'm planning a church up in Evanston. I'm a student ministry guy at Northwestern University, one of the Big Ten schools. And then I was asked to lead all of the extensions for Southern Seminary. So I came down to Nashville and was working with that, and then retired from Southern in 2019, retired from the Army in 96. And so we're down here. My son's my pastor. I've got another son overseas doing work, and I've got a daughter in D.C., and we're just cooking right along, doing some writing now.
Enjoying retirement?
I enjoy it. I think I'm working as hard as I did beforehand. I had 3 books come out in 2022, and working on others now, and working heavily in the church. So yeah, I want to wear out instead of rust out.
Yes, yeah, good. That's something that I think that this can be applied both to having quote unquote long times of rest, but also people, when you like leave a job or leave work or whatever, people tend to just want to do nothing, and that's how to just completely fall off,
Yeah.
right?
Sounds terrible to me.
Yeah, you don't want to do that. But I'm glad that you're staying busy, especially having done all this stuff in your life, and you're continuing to do stuff. So yeah, props to you.
By the way, I taught a course called Ethics of Work and Leisure, and I stood up for both of them. I taught that at Southern, and I'm mixing that next month. Actually, I'm going to go down to do something at a church in Florida. But while I'm down there, I thought, look, I've been to 30 ballparks before in my life. I've never been to a Florida one, so I bought tickets to see the Marlins and the Rays, and so I'm going to piggyback some R&R on some work. So it's a good mix.
Well, good. The main reason that I wanted to have you on this, and that's because in one of the previous episodes, Dr. Barnard, he mentioned, one of the things that he mentioned is that the only way that he stays out of being nihilistic, stays out of falling into a pit of despair, right, is knowing that he has a purpose on this world, right? that God has created him, and that he tries to embody the virtues of faith, hope, and love, which I think are uniquely Christian virtues, right? But in some of the feedback that I've gotten from that, one of the questions that I've heard here and there is, what if I agree with Dr. Barnes' assessment that, faith, hope, and love are good things, we should pursue them, and we should try to embody those virtues, right? But I don't necessarily believe in God, or if I don't believe in God or a God, then I don't believe in the Christian God. So we're going to do a 2-part episode. This first one is about the mere existence of a God, right? And you taught apologetics for a long time, and so I was just wanting to get into that. What if I told you, hey, most people aren't this, but I am a complete atheist. I believe in no transcendental universe. I believe that, the universe is as we see it, that there is no greater power. There's no spiritual power, right? How would you respond?
Yeah, and I heard a bit of Dr. Bernard, and I do appreciate what he said. I do think our default position is to believe in God. I think you have to work pretty hard to be a really gritty, determined atheist or agnostic, that we have a hunger. In fact, you have the testimony in the heavens, and even a sunset. It's like, wow, that can't just be sheer molecules or something. So I think there is a certain sense of wonder, a certain longing for God. But if you don't have the real God, if you don't have God and God in Christ, then I remember there's a guy he was a Christian psychologist, a very fine one, and he talked about how we work with broken cisterns. If you're in the Holy Land, you have cisterns, even up on Masada, that big plateau near the Dead Sea where the Israelites took that big stand. They have massive rock caves dug out, or rock things, and they capture all the rain they can. But if you have a cracked cistern, it runs out. And so the Bible even talks about broken cisterns. And so people will say, oh, here's the deal. I'll be a Bears fan or something, and I'll paint my face and go take my shirt off at Soldier Field, and I'll learn everything about the Bears, and I'll do that. And then after a while, that kind of plays out, and say, oh, I'll be an epicure. I'll be a food fancier, and I'll visit all the fine restaurants on the North Shore of Chicago. And another say, I'll be a patriot, and I'll put everything in. And what happens, and there are a lot of good things, eating in restaurants and being a Bears fan and the like, and yet that's what they make their God. And by the way, you have a lot of people who I think make the environment their God. I'm going to recycle, and I'm going to fight against climate change or whatever. Or some will say, oh, I'm going to do this social justice thing, and I'm going to march for this and that and the like. And what happens is they throw their lives in there, and it just shows that they have a sense of emptiness that they have to fill, and so they get their little religion cranked up. Mm-hmm. But and a lot of them can do that all the way through life. And I even think of, I don't know if you remember Jerry Lewis. He was a kind of a comedian and a movie actor, and he had this telethon, and I forget whether it was muscular dystrophy or something like this, and you had Jerry's Kids and this kind of thing. But he was not a believer, but he threw himself so thoroughly into that became his justification for life. So you can dig in and determine and not go nihilistic. And yet again and again people say, even I tell you, with the Bears, I lived up there when Walter Payton was playing, and he was a great running back. Finally they won the Super Bowl, and I think Jim McMahon was the quarterback, and so he was playing, and he was a remarkable sort of guy, but he didn't score a touchdown in the Super Bowl. I forget whether it might have been I can't remember, but I was around about then, and they gave the ball to this massive guy named William Refrigerator Perry, and he bowled it in and scored. And I remember they interviewed Walter after the thing, and he said, it's not quite as great as I thought it would be. I mean, that's a big thing, but you dream for it. Now you've got it. You're kind of like a dog chasing a car all these years, and you finally catch the car. Like, oh, now what do I do? And so people come up kind of empty, and then they reach that kind of nihilistic point. Particularly if life is really hard. I mean, if they've had a terrible breakup, or they've lost a kid to leukemia, or as you say, as a policeman, you have. Again and again, you're just working with the worst of the worst, and without signs of reform or hope in some places, and you just think, well, what's the use? So, yeah, I think that you can arrive at that point, and even where you become suicidal, or like, what the heck? But chances are you've tried different cisterns to catch life water in it. And yeah, at that point, I mean, a lot of people, I've seen it happen again and again and again. They persist all the way through life. I have atheist philosopher acquaintances. Mm-hmm. Some of them were my professors at Vanderbilt. And they can brazen that thing through till they die, that they're going to stand up for Hume and, whatever. So you can do it. But boy, it takes effort, because I think your heart beats for some kind of relationship with the transcendent or something like this, but their cisterns empty out, and after a while it's like, well, what the heck,
I have referenced this book a million times in this podcast, but You Are What You Love. One of the things that he mentions is humans are made to worship, right? And that is what. It's one of the things that makes us unique from the rest of creation, that we actually worship something above us, and whether that's God or whether that's other things, that can be everything that we talked about. Your job, it can be the bears,
your family, your kids,
and some of these things are good things, but it's not God,
right?
And so, on a personal note, that's how I came to find Christ. It was not some, philosophical takedown of an atheist, or it wasn't some, big, long, drawn out debate between, agnostics or atheists and, and Muslims and all this. It was just a very slow realization that there are good things in the world that I can actively pursue, but there is no utopia right here.
Right.
We are not going to find it here.
Super important to understand.
And you can continue to strive for it. You can be the richest person on the world. You can be the guy with the biggest muscles, or the most attractive woman, but you're never going to reach a full satisfaction, because this world is ontologically it is ontologically incomplete, and it will only become complete when God comes back.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah. By the way, another book in philosophy is called The Open Society and Its Enemies, by not a believer named Karl Popper. And he said the most dangerous people on earth are utopians. And he mentions Plato's Republic, and he mentions Marxism. He says, because if they think we can get perfection, they will run over you to get there. And they, it's like, hey, you're a hindrance, and so we will now kill you. If you're going to make an omelet, you have to break some eggs. And so when you finally realize, and this is a very important Christian doctrine, the fall, when you kind of realize, until kingdom come, it's going to be messed up. And actually, I think that helps you work as a policeman or an army officer or something like that. I think it was G.K. Chesterton. He was a Catholic journalist and theologian and popular writer.
We've talked about Chesterton before.
Okay, well, he was saying, and I think it was Chesterton, in one of the writings, he says, they were telling me all along, no, it's getting better, hey, this is the Christian century, the 1900s or something, and so it's going to happen now, and then you have all these world wars and the Holocaust and stuff, and he says, they kept telling me it's getting better and better, and he said, man, I don't know, I don't see it, and then he read essentially the Bible and said, no, it's messed up, and it's not, and he said, and my heart just sang, and he says, yes, finally somebody's told the truth. And so if you think that something's going to be just really wonderful and darling. And now, oh no, what? Come on, guys, get on board. It's got to be. But then when you realize the nature of man, then it's like more grist for your meal. Like, see there? I mean, we're broken, we're messed up, and we're hellions in a lot of ways without a touch.
Yeah, and especially police officers have to confront this every day.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
You cannot do this job and say, hey, everybody's great, right?
Yeah,
because then you turn around, you arrest people for crazy stuff.
Yes.
And truly evil stuff. And you're
truly.
Like, know, it makes you question sometimes, like, is this person deserving of God's love, right?
Yeah.
Do we, should I show this person grace, right? And so...
by the way, I did something on justice back in the 80s. It was during what was it? It was like McGovern-Nixon, and I had a Mennonite friend, and we were arguing back and forth about justice and this and that. And so when I went to Wheaton, I was prompted by other new faculty members to write a book about integrating faith and learning, and I decided I'm going to try to get clear on justice. Everybody keeps throwing that word around, and boy, do we throw it around today with social justice and all this sort of stuff. And I came up with a book in '83, and it strikes me that retribution is a big part of biblical justice. I mean, you have eye for eye, tooth for tooth, wound for wound, burn for burn, stripe for stripe, and there is a place for mitigation and exoneration and so forth. But if you take that bedrock thing out, that man is actually culpable and deserving of some kind of, where it's not all just rehab, then you miss the deal. So thank God somebody is in charge of justice, and I'm thankful the police. Like, yes, I'm sorry. Your daddy was not there, and yes, but you shot that guy in the head on the sidewalk. I'm sorry. You can visit the chaplain in prison or what have you. So I do think that there can be satisfaction in saying, look, I'm an instrument of God. Romans 13, 1-7. There is that place too. So yeah, sometimes we get a real simp notion of what Christianity holds, but personally, yeah.
Just making a side note there, one of the things that police officers kind of struggle with is that yes, we do find people doing crime, but we're not supposed to be part of their sentence, right? And so it may be a good thing to arrest X, Y, and Z person for doing something bad, but
no, you're not like RoboCop on the streets blowing people.
Well, like Judge Dredd.
Judge Dredd.
We're not that.
Yeah.
No, not at all. All we're supposed to do is find people committing a crime and take them to a judge. That's literally our.
No,
our
I
job.
agree with that, but I'm saying you don't just kind of give them a hug and a donut and say now cut that out. There's something that backs you up. But yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
By the way, I was in the National Guard during a fair number of riots and crazy times in America, and we weren't supposed to go out and execute people. In fact, one of the things we did was, this is an act of mercy. It says when you've got a big crowd, you don't push them. We had the lucite, or whatever they call it, not lucite, maybe, the shields and the like, and you don't back them into an alley where they freak out and then they do that, but you try to take them to like a 5 points corner and so they can disperse, and you read them the riot act. You pick up the bullhorn and you say, now guys, this ain't right, you're going to have to disperse. And then you don't just immediately go, you give them time, and then you take the bullhorn up again, and you take. So it's not as though you're the public executioners, but you're the peace officer, so to speak. But there is a bottom line.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Very very much so. Yeah. Well, circling back to existence of God, right? What would you say are a couple of good arguments in and of themselves for the existence of God?
Yeah.
Do you have a couple of things you can talk about?
Sure. Yeah, and by the way, I'm going to pick up on something you said earlier about your own faith. It wasn't as though there was some kind of slapdown win over some skeptic, and therefore you said, okay. And I do remember I had a lot of Northwestern students, had some Loyola students as well in my church. And it's not as though they were just thinking, oh, if I just hear a more refined version of the ontological argument, then I will accept Christ. It's largely a matter of will. It's like, I just don't want a boss. That's why I want to run my own affair. But yeah, they're classic arguments. I mean, sometimes they speak of 5 ways. There are other kinds of ways. But anyway, one of them is, I think the classic one, and even goes back to Plato, is called the teleological argument. It's based on the word telos in Greek, which means down the line or the end point, and it just means that there seems to be design or purpose or something going on here. And so there are different versions, like, look how the atmosphere fits us so beautifully in the world's resources and the tip of the earth and the sunlight, and look at the beautiful operation of the eye and the little baby's ear, and I mean, whatever. And so they say, I think there's a designer, because there sure seems to be design. It doesn't look random. So that's a classic one, and there are different versions of that. One is called the cosmological argument. And there are versions of that, but one says, look, everything seems to have a cause. And why does the leaf fall to the ground? Well, because at a certain time of the year, then some of the connectors are closed off. Well, why does that happen? Because of the cold and the this and the that, and you trace it back. And finally you say, there's got to be a first cause. There's got to be something that got this going. And then the others say, at any given moment, you have to have something sustaining. It just doesn't float by itself. So that's the cosmological argument. The ontological argument is some people think it sounds like wordplay. You say, okay, think of the greatest being, the being than which no greater can be conceived. Think of the highest possible being. Okay, now, did you think of him as existing? Well, not necessarily. I was just imagining. Well, then that's not the greatest possible being, because he exists if he's great. And so the greatest possible being must exist, or he wouldn't be. And I'm thinking, oh, okay. So they've worked with that in a variety of ways. There is an aesthetic argument. I did a book in 2022 called Apologetical Aesthetics, and some of my doctoral students in that area did some work here. And basically you're saying Darwin can't explain the appreciation of beauty. He can explain in his fancy pants way how in the world we got an extra appendage or how we did this or that. But it doesn't seem that aesthetic appreciation has great survival value. I was teaching on the south side of Chicago. It's a pretty tough area down in this place where the church was located. And I said, well, look, you grew up around here. And it was kind of a tough area. I mean, you had all this concertina wire with plastic, grocery bags flopping in the wind, and you have mangy dogs and boarded up windows and crumbling curbs and potholes. And I said, now, some people say, oh, you just appreciate what you grow up around with. You're habituated to that. But I said, how many of you would rather live here or on the North Shore of Chicago with these big lawns and great trees overlooking Lake Michigan and the breezes and everything well manicured? Boy, they jump for that immediately. And so why is it that you appreciate that? And some will say, well, it's just psychologically. And there's studies that say we appreciate blue landscapes because of the water and your greater survivability. But then I thought, wait a second. I was over in the Negev desert at a place called Wadi Rum, it means kind of Roman wash, and it was the most deadly place I've been. I think I haven't been at the top of Everest, but it was so hot you would burn through your sandals, and there's red sand and tough granite jutting out. And if it weren't for tents, you couldn't even survive there. But we did our little tour bus thing. But I thought, this is one of the most beautiful places on earth. In fact, Matt Damon made a movie about Mars, and they filmed part of it there. And he said, this is so beautiful. Like, how does Darwin explain that? This is a place with no survival value. It'll kill you, and yet you're enthralled by it. And so, again, that's called the aesthetic argument. Others have made it that they can't explain that sort of thing. There's the moral argument. I mean, C.S. Lewis picked up on this. There seems to be a law, an internal law. Romans 2:14 and 15 says that the law of God's written on our heart with our conscience excusing us or accusing us. Some people talk about a yoke value, or even taboos that are in every culture, the incest taboo. Like, whether you're going to the New Hebrides or the Hebrides, or whether you're going to, or the New Hebrides, or whether you're going to, a Tibetan mountain valley, if they start pushing date your sister, it's like a Jeff Foxworthy joke. You may be a redneck if you go to family reunion or something.
Or cannibalism or
something. Some of that stuff. It's like a yuck factor. Where does that come from? And he says even in prisons with hardened criminals, they give excuses for this. Like, well, I didn't know such and such. Or, well, I was raised this way. Or whatever. Or I didn't. And the fact that you give excuses shows that you have a moral sense of being accountable. And so he says if there's a moral law, which we recognize by our behavior, then there's got to be a moral lawgiver. And so you've got that sort of thing. So there are a variety of approaches. I mean, you have cultural apologetics that just say, look, I mean, I'll give you one example. I wrote a book called Moral Apologetics. So anyway.
You've written a lot of books.
Yeah, I'm just busy. But anyway, I was with my in-laws one Christmas. I was reading USA Today, and I think it was 1 week before Christmas or 1 week before the end of the year. And in it, they said, okay, we've listed various causes through the year, but now that you're doing your taxes at the end of the year and you want to make contributions, we're going to give you 10 charities that we think deserve it. And so they listed the 10, and I looked them up. I didn't know the background for most of them, and I think 7 of the 10 were founded by avowed Christians. And USA Today is not like Moody Monthly or something like this, And it was everything from Susan Komen Run for the Cure or Komen Run for the Cure, Boys Club, Girls Club, Ducks Unlimited, Special Olympics, just going down the list. And it's like, what is it with these Christians that they are, and here's what, Samaritan's Purse has already landed planes out on Maui. We're just there, and you think, what is it about these people? They must be plugged in to something wonderful, and so that's moral apologetics.
Yeah, or I mean, look down the street. The largest hospital in Memphis is like the Methodist something or another, and that's not uncommon. I think,
of course not.
There's all kinds of cities where the largest hospitals is
Absolutely.
Christian. Over in our neck of the woods, they have a pretty big Catholic hospital network.
Yeah,
but yeah, there's. I think that there is. I think people they look for the crucifix of something. They look for that little tiny, this is what I'm looking for, and then I'm gonna become a Christian, right? Like you mentioned at the very beginning, and I hate to say it, but most of the evidence that we have for God is not just. It's not like we have on video God the Father saying to the world, I am God the Father.
Yeah.
Right? Now, we do have God the Son in the Bible, but we don't have like an actual video, right? And we continue to search for that, right? We continue to look for, trying to put meaning to the universe, trying to figure out, if there's a God or not, and this and the other. And, I think that, especially as police officers, where, we're constantly confronted with the visceral reality of evil, right? Like it's not just one of the things that we brought up before is that not only do we see evil, like anyone can go watch a police officer's body camera, we touch it. We smell it. On a really bad day, we taste it, and so we're in the flesh, in it, right? And I think that if you don't have an understanding of the universe that includes God, then you look around, what you're surrounded with, and you think that why do I even do this job? And so I think that it is only with Christ that we're going to be able to do this for a long term. To, get our pension.
No, that's right. And by the way, I taught philosophy of science at Wheaton, and one day we had a guy who wrote one of our textbooks out from the University of Illinois Chicago Circle, and very fine writer in philosophy. And as he spoke to our class, he said, I wanted to be a doctor. I was taking organic and all the pre-med stuff. And then he said one day he woke up and realized he's going to have to spend his whole life working with sick people. He said, yikes, who wants that? Well, police spend their lives working with messed up people quite a bit. You also find honorable people and helpful people and so forth. But it is just tough, and it really does help to have a framework. Look, I've talked about proofs for God's existence. If you'll just follow along, it'll make sense. But there's another kind of apologetic we do where then they attack us, and it's called the problem of evil. The question is, how come there's so much evil? Sometimes it gets down to this. If God's totally in control, why did he let that little fawn in Maui or California get caught in the barbed wire and burned to death in the wildfire? Like, if you're God, you could free the fawn and let him run away. Or why is my 8-year-old daughter dying of leukemia when I've been a good guy? And so there are answers to that as well.
Why did that dad of 4 lock his kids in a trailer and set the trailer on fire?
Yes, terrible stuff. And you read it every morning in the news. How in the world does this happen? And there are answers to that. One is called the free will defense, that God gives us the freedom to do good or bad. And so if he gives us freedom, we're not just, little automata or Stepford wives or something like that. Then we can go off and do bad stuff. And if he stops us short every time we're about to do something bad, that's a whole different kind of world. Another approach is, there are numbers, but one's called the soul-making theodicy, that it's, you don't make a diamond without heat and pressure. You don't you don't wear a wedding ring with just a piece of carbon on it, but you have to have this stuff. And God's not making mushrooms when he's making his children. And so he refines us in the fire of just a infernal sort of world in many ways. Anyway, we talk about that as well. And that's the thing that hits police so much. And in fact, it hits military guys. I've known people who came out of Vietnam or even short-term duty in Haiti or in Bosnia, and they're just they have post-traumatic stress syndrome and so forth, or they just I was just reading, I think it was Tinker Air Force Base, I think it's in Oklahoma, that they've in the last year had 17 deaths that were like, what's going on there? And they think a fair number of suicides. So people are broken or scared or horrified or despairing or something, and that's the world we're in. And so it is amazing how you have the wherewithal. Some people have the wherewithal to just say, God's on his throne, I'm going with him, and I'm not expecting utopia, but we're going to work with what we've got. And by the way, look at the splendor of what people do as they cope with this.
Yeah, that's one thing that we had a different guest talk about. He's said that he has what's called the spiritual gift of plotting. What that means for him is the ability to just do something for a long time and not look for, he's not looking for the next goal or the next promotion or next whatever. He just wants to follow the area that God's put him in.
That's great.
And he's not looking to gain honor or gain accolades for it. Just stay in his lane and continue to do that. And I think that there is, the more I have thought about that, the more I've seen that there's real virtue in that, right? That to not be concerned with the next thing, and just understand that you're in the situation that you're in at that moment. And then if God gives you promotion, great. If God doesn't give you a promotion, that's fine. And so as long as you continue to glorify God, to follow him,
you preach, I'll turn the pages. That makes perfectly good sense to me. I do think that we are so eaten up with careerism. By the way, if you do a concordance study of the Bible, in the Bible, you don't have a big thing about career. It's not like Paul is called to Macedonia, and he says, well, do you have dental? Or, well, are the schools good? Something like this. There is something about just being flat out. It says Abraham got up, God said, get up and go, and he didn't even tell him where he was going. He just said, head that direction. And I was reading Hebrews, the Hall of Fame yesterday, and how he just went up, got up and went. And I do think that people eat themselves up. By the way, you see people who talk about, he destroyed me, I was 23 and he did this and that, and it's like, wow, they're deep, they're sensitive. And you're like, hey, just put a sock in it, get on with life. I mean, I beg your pardon, he didn't promise you a rose garden, and I don't mean to be brutal about this, but today we are so easily triggered, and we need safe spaces, and we need to be sure that we've got a ladder up, we can break ceilings and build our career. And like, what in the world? Here's Paul saying, I've just learned to live in whatever state I'm in, to be content. I got crosswise with some trustees, 25 years ago. And it just kind of blew up. I was chewing folks out. I was doing a little Army when you don't do Army in a church setting. And so anyway, I was fired, and God's been so great, and they've actually had me back, named the library for me, but still at the moment it was an acquired taste. But the thing is, I thought, okay, I'm not going to eat worms and die. I'll just, what's the next thing? Well, I need to write some of my old teachers and thank them. Or somebody calls, could you do this? Yeah, I'll do that. And you he puts something on your plate every day, and you say, thank you, Lord, I got this. And I'll do this today. And then let him do the lifting. Let him take you down. And by the way, what a mercy it is sometimes when he takes you down a notch. Hebrews also says those he loves, he disciplines. And maybe you're off. Or I had a terrible, terrible disappointment. When I came out of Vanderbilt with a PhD, there were no jobs, and certainly no jobs in Southern Baptist colleges where my daddy taught. I wrote 20 of them. None of them had a job. So I was just kind of dashed. But then finally, there was a school in North Carolina. It was Lutheran, and maybe that's the one. And I went and interviewed, and it didn't work out. And so, I'll just grump down and just doubt God. Well, one thing led to another, and it's like, thank God I didn't go to that school. And also over getting fired, like, thank God I got fired, because then I got to do this thing, and I went to Chicago, and then I went to Southern, and I got to work with the retired CEO of American Standard Corporation on a website out of New York, and I found myself in all kinds of conferences and meetings in Vienna and Jerusalem and you name it, and 40 trips to New York. And it's like, after a while you kind of think maybe there's someone in charge. And then I heard once about a Moody Bible Institute student who was threatened because it was a tough neighborhood back in the day. And it's kind of upscale, of course. But I read this in Newsweek. Somebody pulled a knife on a Moody student in that area. And he said, what, are you threatening me with heaven? And so, if it blows up, then it's really a whole different perspective.
Yeah, I've got a family member who, long story short, my family member has multiple debilitating chronic illnesses.
Right.
And, when she got the diagnoses and was feeling the symptoms, there's two options here, right? It either just give in, stay in bed, don't do anything, 5 years you die, right? Unfortunately, if you do that with those kind of diseases, that's what happens. The other option is put one foot in front of the other.
Absolutely.
And not think about the things around you and just move forward. And now she, does conferences in different countries and, does all kinds of crazy stuff. And, that she would have never imagined if she didn't have all these diseases, right?
Absolutely.
Because part of what she does talks about stuff like this, right?
Yeah.
But along those lines, I came directly from college into police work. I hadn't really done anything, hadn't been out in the world, hadn't seen anything, and I cannot stress how much that first year of police teaches you. Not about academics and how to add 2 + 2 and how to be good in a classroom, but just how the real world works, right? Yeah. when you first get out and start doing stuff on your own, you have your own cases and arrest your own people and put your real handcuffs on real people, and use your real taser on people and use your real pepper spray on people and all this stuff, right? Whenever you're in a situation, a really good example of this is a DUI arrest, because you have to do all kinds of different stuff with a DUI arrest. You have to make the stop, you have to get out with a person, you have to do tests if they're going to do them, you have to make the arrest, then you have to write a search warrant for their blood and take the blood, get the blood sent off, all kinds of craziness, right? It's a lot of paperwork, and especially as a young officer, it's easy to get bogged down because you sit there and you're like, I have all these things I have to do in order to get this thing done. I had a really good FTO. I've referenced him once before. I'm going to reference him again. Whenever I had that feeling, when I was like, yeah.
Now, what's an FTO? Help me.
Oh, field training officer.
Okay.
A lot of agencies, when you get out of an academy, you go ride with a field training officer. And then he just teaches you how to actually do the job. Right. And so one of the things that he said is, how do you eat a crap sandwich? One bite at a time, right? It's not fun, but you have to do it, and we're here, and it is what it is. And you can complain about it, you can despair about it, or you can put one foot in front of the other and do it. Now, I can already hear someone who has maybe a stoic argument coming at that and saying, that's what I believe, right? Block everything out in the rest of the world, just focus on what, stay in your lane, whatever. All the rest of the world shouldn't matter. Well, that's kind of true, right? That's, you do want to stay in your lane. Like we're talking about, the good thing of, plodding, right? Just continue to move forward. But also realizing that there is a moral compass in the universe. There are bad things that happen, and I think it's only with God that we can stare that in the face. Right. If you stare that in the face and you don't have an understanding of the universe with God in it, once again, despair. You're going to start going back down to that.
What's the use? What's the point?
Exactly. But if we do have an understanding of the world with God, then not only can we stay where we are, but we can look at the rest of the world and say, this is an evil thing, but this universe is not complete. Right? Absolutely.
It occurs to me when we're talking about coming in and being the tough guy or something, and of course it could be very extenuated where you're going through all the paperwork for the DUI. But I remember we kept hearing, I went into essentially the officer corps and infantry school during the Vietnam War. And so a lot of the talk, and it was celebrated by the media, and they got a lot of attention, the March on the Washington, the Pentagon, and where they're sticking flowers in the ends of gun barrels at the Pentagon, and they said, oh, you're baby killers, you're napalming, you're this and that. And so they were treating us as though we were being trained to kill. And I thought, I guess, I'm firing a 50 cal or I'm firing a 105. I mean, just familiarization and training. And so we're learning to do marksmanship with the M14s and M16s and the like. And so I guess, I get, but say, wait, I know how to kill. I mean, I had a little 22 and I could plunk cans, and I figure you put it at a head, you could kill somebody and you could drive over somebody and kill people. What I learned in the Army was how to die, because they asked us to do all kinds of unnatural things. I mean, if you have a machine gun up in a tree line and he opens up on you, then you have various things you do, like fire and maneuver or fire and movement. And one guy gets up and rushes while the other covers, and other rushes. So you try to get the tree line and go around. And then well, wait a second. Wouldn't you want to run away if somebody's shooting a machine gun? And I think a lot of people don't know that the thing that is really contrary to our natural tendencies, I suppose, is to go to the sound of the guns or to go to the danger. And for someone to go into harm's way, that's what you have to learn. And so instead of run away, it's like, hey, there's an incident, there's a domestic incident on Maple Street, saddle up. And like, whoa, things go crazy. So I think there's a great honor in that. But if you think God is sovereign, then you think anything on your plate each day is something that he's in charge of, he's aware of, and he's allowing it to happen, or he's initiating it. And even it says, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. And so you think, I'm not out here just making it up or being blown back and forth by the winds of fate, but my sovereign God knows exactly where I am. And he gave me that today. Some people think, I need to do something grand today. And he says, no, look, I mean, we got so many people who won't do little things like, it's beneath me to work at McDonald's and be the fry chef or something like that. I need to be a community organizer and stuff like that. No, this family has driven, they have limited money. They're going to see relatives. They come in, they need some fries that work. Would you please, and be pleasant? How hard would it be to be friendly, or if you're captivated with some of their tasks, to just turn to them and say, be with you in a minute. Just a smile, it can just make that family's day. And yet you spit on that as something very, very low and say, no, treasure what you've got.
Yeah. My first time that I, outside of family chores and stuff,
right.
First time I did real work was, we had this guy at our church who had this landscaping company, and I was going to go on a mission trip, and I needed to save money to go on the mission trip.
Yeah.
So I went and I worked for him for a couple of days. Landscaping, hard, long, southeast, July, hot, doing mulching all day, right?
Yeah.
But that it was over 3 days. But I will never. I don't think I'm ever going to forget that, because that was the first time that I'm actually doing something with my body.
Yeah.
that is it's a good thing to do this, right? And that's translated in even the work I do now. I coming out of school, I didn't want to be stuck in an office. I wanted to do something with my hands, interact with the world, and not just sit behind a desk. And I think that you having been in the Army Reserves has really helped you out with the rest of the other stuff you've done, right?
Yeah.
In the classroom and in your studies, right?
Yeah, and part of it is just putting yourself out on the end of the comfort zone. I remember very vividly, we had Ranger Week at Fort Benning, and we were out for a week walking in the boonies with everything we needed for the week on our backs. Little food and this and that. And we walked through a lightning storm one night, and then we just plopped down in the mud, and with the lightning flashing, and we're soaked to the bone and freezing. I thought, I can say, we have guys who I was in charge of the extensions, and we would send guys out to 11 places, and I would look at their little reports, their expense reports. And some guys would be really tough campers out there. They would go to to like a hostel or something like that and stay and be frugal. And others would insist on flying, if not first class, at least in such a way that we'll spend more to get their points. And one guy in Jackson, I was teaching in Jackson. For Southern, they had the thing, and I found some hotel on the east side of town and went in, and I don't know, let's just say it was La Quinta or something, I can't remember. And I recommended to one of the teachers going out, I said, hey man, that was a good spot. And he said, I don't want to sleep with a gun under my pillow. And so he went to a place that was like, I don't know, $60 more. And I thought, gun under your pillow, after you slept on the ground in a lightning storm and so forth, and God's on his throne, why are you so precious and tender? I will say this, you talk about your first days. I had a couple of days as a policeman in Evanston. When you come there, they want to orient you to the police work in town if you're so I was a pastor, and I think 25 of us went through a course, and I think it was 8 nights, Tuesday nights, 2 hours each. And so one night is reaction. They had big screens, and we had laser, and we're supposed to react to a guy acting hinky, what do you shoot? And one night was gang night, and we learned we had the gangster disciples, the Black Pea Stone Nation, the Latin Kings, and the Vice Lords, and so the markings and all that kind of stuff. And another night was a ride around with a policeman, and we show up at like 11 and ride till 3. And you better stay in the car, but just watch. And in that little 4-hour window, we pulled this gal wandering around in a rough part of town just aimlessly, and it turns out they had a bench warrant for her out in west suburbs. They checked her in. They took the drawstrings out of her sweatpants because she could harm herself, and she was looking for drugs. Then somebody was messing around in a garage, and we ended up going 80 miles an hour on a city street around, and I thought, this is exciting. But to go out in the night and poke around, and you don't know what's in there, and it was just one thing after another, and I thought, wowzer, this would be something to do every night.
Yeah.
And so, it's thank God those are the tough guys.
It's crazy land out there.
It's crazy
promise.
land.
Yeah. Mark, including this first episode, do you have anything you'd like to leave us with? And once again, we touched on the existence of God himself, but is there anything you want to leave us with?
Well, I'm grateful for the Reformation in that Martin Luther pushed back against the notion that there's sacred and secular vocations. And he said they're all sacred. And I'm not saying that Catholics don't understand this as well, but in the setting and he was saying something like, he's quoted to say, there's more virtue in a German housewife than all the nuns of Europe. And the point was, you think, oh, well, he's doing something holy for the Lord. He got called to the ministry. Now that guy's just a bus driver, in Chicago on Sheridan or something, or he's just an insurance salesman, or she's just a homemaker. And God says, what are you talking about? When I called him to be a bus driver, do you realize how many lives are in his hand? Do you realize and his manner, his safety, and all that? Those are my treasure. What are you saying? That's not holy. This man is like at an accident scene, and he's at a construction site, or he's going to a domestic disturbance, and you're saying that's not important. I will say one other thing too, just in terms of apologetics. I think there's also another problem in the ministry today, and I call it ingratiationism, and it's the notion that the power is not really the gospel, like opening Lydia's heart, as it is in the New Testament. The power is in our charm and ingratiating ourselves to them and disarming them and not getting too far ahead of them, or our real power is in some kind of acclaim, or we can fill an auditorium or something like that. But to realize it's the small steady stuff. Look, don't worry about your big flash ministry. Don't worry about multiple congregations. Don't worry about your blog deal, your brand, your stuff like that. If that happens, okay, fine. You just preach the Word of God. You give the simple Word of God, and let me go to work in light of the Word, and I'm going to do heart surgery. It's not as though we're going to bring in the MIT guys and the Harvard guys, and we're going to argue them into the kingdom. It's a heart matter. And so that's simple plotting. So you can say you may be at a little bitty church in, No Hope Baptist Church and little bitty whatever. You just stand in the pulpit that day and you do your thing faithfully. Let me take care of the rest, which fits your plotting thing.
Amen. Yeah. All right. Well, Mark, thank you for the first episode, and excited to have you on for the second one. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email remainingsanepodcast@gmail.com. Also, please remember to subscribe, leave a review. That always helps. You can also find us on Twitter @RemainingSanePC. Have a blessed rest of your day.